and you were on your own. You didn't have an entourage. You only had your fellow competitors.
Yeah.
And, Wolf, yeah, and you had like real characters, you had Jamie Brisick, but Todd Chesser, Dave Parmenter, Gerlach, like all these people who have really larger than life personalities, or quirks, and Todd Chesser,
and they were just kids or teenagers at the time,
late teens, early 20s, given money to surf basically, and it's not a lot, but you make the most to survive. Out of it. And so this is a really fun section, and it talks about the realities and all the stuff that they're dealing with, but it also talks a bit about Todd Chesser, which I think is phenomenal. He influenced the whole momentum generation and big wave surfer who had passed away surfing alligators in the early or mid to late 90s. But he was quite a prankster and quite known.
Can't wait.
For really, really doing some fun stuff. And so this section has like a really interesting story. I think people will really enjoy. Here, enjoy. Rolling Stone. Now this here, I find really interesting. These are notes that you kept, while you're on tour. And if you look up at the top there, it says Chesser owes $50. I don't know if you know Todd Chesser is, but he was a legendary big wave surfer, also on the tour for a while, and probably like a big brother to the momentum generation, like Kelly Slater, Shane Dorian, Rob Machado. He like pushed them and made them who they were. Mm-hmm. You guys, when someone would do well on tour, how would that work? Like you guys lent each other money. There was like a traveling group.
Yeah, it was really kind of hand-to-mouth scraping by. Many times I would go to France for a surf contest and do poorly, and then I would realize that of the 3 boards I had brought with me, I'd have to get rid of one so I could pay my hotel bill. And so I would be, on the weekend of the contest, I would put for sale on my board in French, and hopefully someone would come by and buy it, and I'd get $300 or $400, and that would get me on to the next event. But there was a lot of that. There was a lot of times where you would go with. It was funny because the more you'd go thinking, I'm going to kill it, I'm going to win some money, and I'm going to break in. And if you didn't, then you were penniless, and you were borrowing money, cobbling it together from your friends to sort of go on. So it was like I would come home from events, and I would have a list of who I owed money to, who I lent money to, etc.
And you had Chesser owes $50 there too.
Yes.
Did he?
He paid it back.
He paid it back?
Yeah. But Todd Chesser was a dear friend, and he died surfing big waves. But he was a great, great friend. He lived on the South Shore of Oahu.
What was he like on tour? Like I hear there was lots of pranks, and he was a real funny man sometimes.
He was one of the great pranksters, and he was one of the initiators of Faces of Death, which was a thing we did where we would get a rent-a-car and we would go around and pull handbrake slides and just.
Wait! What do you mean you drive around and pull handbrake slides? What would you do here?
Well, okay, so the tour would, very different. Now there's 32 guys on tour. So that's small. At this time, there was 100 guys would come to these tiny little beach towns in the southwest of France, and Cape Town and Durban and what have you. So your pro surfing buddies, it was like this big frat party that was sort of spread about. And so at the end of the day, you'd be done surfing, you'd go out to dinner, possibly have a drink or two, and you'd be driving home in your rent-a-car, and you would happen to see, up ahead, there's Wes Lane walking along the road, although he was usually in the car, but whatever guy. So we would loop around and then at full speed hit the handbrake and just screech by and watch them fly into the bushes. That was Faces of Death. Fun.
It wasn't just pro surfers, though, was it?
Occasionally it wasn't, but I apologize.
I
feel bad.
Old ladies,
I feel never that bad, but it was good fun. It was a way to entertain ourselves.
And that number there, 16,400. That was
my annual income in 1991, probably.
Wow.
Yep.
What is it? When you see something like this? When was the last time you looked at this before we started prepping for this?
It's been a long time, but they're good memories, definitely. But it's funny, and maybe this is just the story I'm telling myself, because it would have been nice to make 6 figures at the time, but I made hardly anything. But it also was an incredible adventure, because it meant that you would. I slept on couches a lot, but the cool thing about that is I would be a highly ranked, rookie from California, and I would go to South Africa for an event, and there would be the highly ranked rookie from Cape Town, who I'd never met, but someone put us together via fax because there was no emails. And I would land, and this guy, and his family would pick me up because we were 19, 20, and I would stay with them. And by the end of the week, I would have a new set of friends that were all Cape Town people. And the same thing would happen in Australia and Hawaii and Brazil and France. And that was nice. And in a lot of ways, and again, the 6 figures or more would have been really, really nice. But it demanded that you did that. You had to kind of be social because that's just sort of how we got along.
And I mean, how do you feel it is now with the professional surfers? A lot of these guys, they have quite, like you said before, they live in a little bit of a bubble. Do you think they're losing something from this? Do you think pro surfers today get too much too soon, too quick, or is it?
I think it's double-sided. I mean, you could argue it from both sides. It would be so easy for me from the period that I came from to have that kind of bitter attitude towards it and say, oh, these guys got it too easy. And I won't fall into that, absolutely not. There's a sort of, by getting paid a lot of money, you have access to other things. I mean, it's just they're just two different things. But it's just changed so much. It's not the same as, surfing has become so big, and the surfers are sort of celebrities within that world. So they probably are kind of cloistered off a little bit more. And they're psyching up for an event where they could, potentially if they win it, they could, buy a house with that money. So it's a different mentality than when I was on tour. I mean, guys would do all-nighters, and we would be in the Basque Country, and guys would literally go from the bar to surf their heat, and they'd sometimes be half drunk surfing their heat.
Rod Kerr. Yeah, Rod Kerr, one of the more memorable images from my period on tour was we were in the Basque Country. There was some sort of festival going on, and he was in a respectable round. The contest generally started on a Wednesday, ended on a Sunday, and it was probably the Saturday or whatever. But there were a lot of people down on the beach, and he hadn't slept, had done a lot of drinking, and he catches this wave, and he's weaving through, and he's racing through the inside, and there's a bunch of people standing in knee-deep water to get closer to watch the great spectacle that is professional surfing. And Rod's racing along, and he just vomits as he's riding, just pouring vomit out of his mouth, but still trying to do turns. What type of person was Rod Kerr? Didn't he engage in a duel with Damien Hardman, like across multiple continents, drinking alcohol?
I can't remember, but that probably makes sense. But he was a great guy. I mean, that was one of the really fun things. And again, I don't know how interesting all this stuff is. And maybe it was interesting at that time. I think if I had taken a more traditional path and I had gone to college and I had joined a fraternity and I had my buddies, there'd probably be similar stories. But the really fun thing was you would have like a food fight along the road when you're leaving Biarritz and you're heading up to the airport in Bordeaux. And along the way, you see your friend, and you've got some food, and then you race up and you throw something at the car, and then that sets off this thing that goes for a few Ks. And then everyone leaves and goes home, and then a month later, you arrive in Australia, and you see that same person, and they come right back to you. Those things were really great.
And so, Faces of Death, Ben.
I know. That was a movie, too, right?
Probably.
There was like a series of... That's crazy.
Yeah, you just handbrake behind someone, but I mean...
Is that like an early Tokyo Drift?
Maybe.
It sounds so frightening.
To me, like I sometimes want to do that with people crossing the street.
Oh my God.
Just want to stop really short.
Hate mail.
Oh my gosh. But there's one of the stories that I don't think he really mentioned was like Dave Parmenter. They try to do it to him.
Oh.
And they pull up, they see him, and they go and they handbrake. And instead of him jumping, he just turns around and stares them down. And it's like, he knew.
Right.
He
knew.
Nothing can shake him.
Yeah.
But this next one is a photo of Derek Hind.
Yeah.
Derek was a bit of a mentor to Jamie and helped influence him to get into writing and really helped point out like the direction he could go, but also was coaching Jamie and while he was on tour, and he talks about how meticulous Derek was at the heats. He would sit and watch every heat, write every score, take all the notes.
Right.
It was phenomenal. And so this section for me, like I mean, I totally geeked out on because I'm like a big Derek Hine fan. And
Right.
I mean,
Very cool style. Spent time here in New York. Just
he's just so awesome. And Jamie, like,
you actually hung out with Derek in like Rockaway. I think you told me a story.
No, he stays with me when he comes to New York, and I took him to Don Pepe's, took him to some surf spots.
Famous Italian place in Ozone Park.
Oh my gosh, so good. He loved it. He was all about the spaghetti and meatballs.
Oh yeah.
But Derek, yeah, he comes through and he stays. Like, this was before I met him, and so like the days leading up to this interview, a lot of questions about Derek.
Yeah, I bet.
Lots of like, what was he like? Is he really stern? Is he cool? Like, it was just, Jamie totally like delivered, and it's great.
And how cool to have that mentor. I'm excited to hear that, but that mentor at like when you're a young person, to have someone like, you know, who's got that sense of style, that also sort of like outlook that's not just simply narrow, like a narrow surf outlook.
Definitely not narrow, but if he was coaching you for surf, like for a contest, it's like you had to want it. And he was ruthless, and he would try to get you to be ruthless too in the heat. It was all or nothing winning, which is really cool. And I think Jamie dives into it a little bit here. So here, like Brisick talking about Hind, which is just so awesome. Derek Hind, we kind of gloss over it. When Derek, did he coach you? Was he coaching you?
Yeah, he was my coach. He coached the Rip Curl team, and I was sponsored by Rip Curl. So he was my coach for about 3 years.
And what sort of influence did he have on you? Because he was a great writer, an exceptional writer, and known not just in the surfing world, but outside of it as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, this guy must have had a big impact on you.
He really did, and his coaching technique was really interesting. I mean, he was very strategic. I think he loved the idea, because surfing is subjective and a lesser surfer can be an excellent surfer by getting the right waves or what have you. He kind of took a lot of pleasure in watching someone that maybe wasn't as talented take down someone who was really, really talented. He I guess, and maybe it's a real Australian thing, but he'd love to see the underdog do well. But he was interesting, and I mean, we would go down to the water's edge before a heat, and he would whisper things in my ear, and he'd scratch little like plans out on the sand and wipe them away so no one else could see them. And he was fun. But the cool thing for me, and in a lot of ways, I'm jumping forward, but I came to writing later on. But he would be my coach, and we would be staying together. And at night, at the end of the day, he would be writing his contest dispatches, and it was fun to be around that, because I always read a lot when I was on tour, but it was interesting to see kind of this writer in motion. So there would be a lot of scenes where, at the end of the day, you know, he would be sitting at the desk or laying on his stomach, scribbling out his dispatch that he was faxing off for Surfer Magazine, and I would be doing my stretches and listening to my Walkman and psyching up. And they were almost opposite energies, but as time passed, I realized I really liked what he was doing. And I read this stuff, so it was interesting kind of watching the process.
Gosh. Did he encourage you to write? Was it something that he pushed you into?
Yeah, and he turned me on to books, and yeah. I don't think he pushed me into it, but it was more just it's funny, because Derek, I think, he was a great writer, and he was really, really passionate about it, but it wasn't what he was talking. I mean, the focus was more on great performances in the water. So instead of that kind of, if you were in an MFA program, you might be sort of examining the words and doing that. He was more fired up about the great performance that Damien Hardman did in Heat number 7 or what have you. That would be more the topic of conversation.
Nice. So this next section is a photo of Brisick while on the search. And it's like a transition period. It's about 92. And he wasn't doing so well on the tour. He wasn't performing. And, you know, Rip Curl had the search thing, but Brisick was sent on this trip, but almost to write. And this was the direction that he was going. And we talk a lot about the transition from being a pro surfer to working in the industry in some ways, and finding your footing and finding where you go after. Because,
you have all this incredible life experience, but you don't have like the normal day-to-day job experience. Right. And, and he didn't go to school for writing, and he